Hello, my name is Pavlo Ardanov. I am co-founder of the NGO Permaculture in Ukraine, and I am Fulbright Research Scholar at the Agricultural Sustainability Institute in the University of California, Davis. This video lecture is a part of the series on designing crop polyculture, which is sponsored by the International Visegrad Fund. And the topic of today's lecture is polyculture of nut tree crops as the first tool which we design for growers will be targeted for developing polyculture for this group of crops. I would like to present examples and approaches for designing polycultures with nut tree crops from the academic publications available in English and from several specialized books. I hope that this data will demonstrate you some possible directions for designing your polycultures, which you may test and adapt to your local conditions. As you can see from this table, nut trees are nitrogen-demanding crops. Orchards with very large pecan trees may require up to 145 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. Yet, this high nitrogen demand can be at least partly met by legumes. If cool season legumes are grown throughout the orchard and incorporated as green manure, they can contribute between 100 and 250 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare, and less if they grow only in alleys. Winter cover crops can be profitable for Californian almond growers who have flexible contractual obligations, can wait for the long-term return on investment, and can manage cover crops as closely as their cash crops. The average benefit-cost ratio equated to 1.2, and economic benefits will be experienced between 14 and 19 years of this conservation practice. For this cost-benefit analysis, it was assumed that for the first 3 years, green manure clover mix will be used to add biomass, and in subsequent 26 years, an annual reseeding plants will be utilized to mimic native vegetation and to minimize management. Harvest complications from summer cover crops for sweeping almond hulls from the orchard floor in August were evaluated as infrequent revenue losses. In addition to harvest complications, another study in Mediterranean conditions emphasized the importance of trade-off for water consumption between cover crops and almond. Thus, cover crops should be selected to develop during rainy winter season and don't compete with almond in summer. The study in semi-arid conditions, which compared oat and oat wedge cover crops under either sheep grazing in mid-May or hay in early June or grain straw management in mid-July, revealed improvement of soil quality compared to tillage, an increase in organic matter content, improvement of soil chemical and physical fertility, and enhancing biological activity. Early removal of cover crop would minimize competition for water and nutrients and prevent possible almond yield losses. Grazing had the greatest positive effect since it can be applied earlier than the other harvesting regimes. In another experiment in southeastern Spain, cover crop mixture composed of legumes and crucifers with moderate sheep grazing had also demonstrated positive effect on soil properties by increasing water content in soil and boosting most enzyme activities while preserving soil structure. Short-term Sudan grass rotation have been tested in California as non-fumigant approach to manage prunus replant disease on peach trees that lead to suppression of early growth and yield. Tree growth was improved comparing to fallow, but the degree of benefit was less than that achieved by fumigation. Yet, 2 months Sudan grass cultivation under sprinkler irrigation had improved cumulative fruit yield over 4 years period. ongoing research on cover crops for almond orchards by the Amélie Godin Lab in the University of California. You can participate in the survey and read more details in the publication that you see on the slide. In terms of increasing pollination service, which might be of a particular interest for almond crops, a study from South Sinai in Egypt concluded that enhancing on-farm floral abundance and diversity, in particular with simultaneously flowering crops, is a more efficient strategy to improve almond pollination in arid regions, where the natural pollinator habitat is relatively resource-poor, compared to temperate regions, where set-aside semi-natural habitats are used to attract pollinators. Another conclusion was that wild insects, in particular osmia bees, are more efficient almond pollinators than honeybees. In addition, presence of wild bees encourage honeybee movement between almond rows that additionally increase pollination. There are several reports on intercropping cash crops in almond orchards. In terms of almond allelopathy, leaf and bark extracts inhibited the seed germination and root elongation of cress and fenugreek. However, leaf residues stimulated the growth of cress plants. It is not recommended to intercrop almond with peaches, as these trees can hybridize and almond will produce bitter nuts. There are several over-yielding polycultures with almond. For example, in semi-arid conditions, wheat and barley intercropped at the distance of 2.5 meters from the trees demonstrated on average 37% higher yield than in monoculture, as well as higher soil organic matter, total nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium content in the soil. Competition for light between intercrops should be reduced by almond pruning, and fertilizer management should be based on consideration that higher amount of nutrients is observed closer to tree rows. In India, saffron was successfully intercropped with almond, apple, and pear. Mixed orchard with scattered carob, fig, almond, and olive trees are traditional in Mediterranean region for part-time dry farming. And in Portugal, this cultivation system is called barrocal. There are more productive this system is more productive than monocrop orchards. Crop diversity compensates for production irregularity, and carbon sequestration benefit from such cultivation may represent from 125 to 300% of income, which may overcome the lack of fruit production during off-years. Deciduous trees, fig and almond, contribute to improvement of nutrient cycling, and shrubs can additionally increase soil organic carbon content. Such orchards are often cultivated on slopes, where they provide good erosion controls and minimize nutrient losses. There is a number of commercial species of chestnut, and this starchy tree crop was traditional staple food in many areas of Asia, Southern Europe, and in Mediterranean countries. Castanea dentata was a dominant broadleaf forest canopy species in North America until it was devastated by chestnut blight. Along with edible nut, chestnut provide a number of agroforestry co-productions such as honey, edible mushrooms, forage, and wildlife habitat. Both resident and seeded ground cover vegetation improves the productivity and sustainability of chestnut orchard. It increases soil organic matter content, reduces erosion on steep slopes, makes mechanical transit easier after long rainy periods, and improves the distribution and availability of less mobile elements such as phosphorus and potassium. In northern Portugal, no tillage system with natural vegetation or irrigated seeded pasture enhanced fruit production and fruit quality parameters, and significantly increased production of boletus edible mushrooms. No-till system with natural vegetation had the highest net income, and seeded pasture showed the higher forage production. Chestnut has been traditionally intercropped with winter cereals, such as oat and rye in Soutos, traditional orchards in southern Galicia in Spain. Such high-yielding, low-income intercropping system increased fertility of upper soil horizons, and due to reduced leaching and better nutrient cycling, provided better calcium status, which in turn alleviate aluminum toxicity problem. In temperate region of China, shading by Chinese chestnut enhanced soil nutrient availability, augmented activity of soil enzymes, and facilitated the increase of quality and quantity of intercropped tea. And in Hubei low hillagroforestry, sweet chestnut was successfully intercropped with wolfberry, which is also called goji berry. Sweet chestnut might be a good candidate as a host for edible truffle species in multi-cropping plantations in Europe due to tree adaptability to different environments and its multiple uses. It was possible to obtain mycorrhizal chestnut seedlings inoculated with several truffle species in calcium-rich substrate with high pH, which are optimum conditions for truffle growth. Other truffle hosts include some oaks, hazelnut, linden, and pine species, which might be a possible chestnut intercrops for truffle production. Such mycorrhization of chestnut, in particular with tuber brumale, was also beneficial for trees as it stimulated development of the root system, enhanced water and nutrient uptake, and increased total plant biomass. Interplanting chestnut with good nitrogen fixers, for example alder or silverberry, at the rate of 20% nitrogen fixers to 80% chestnut by canopy area, will supply all nitrogen demand for chestnut trees. Potassium accumulators like comfrey or sorrel can be used to increase potassium availability. Trees with good mycorrhizal associations will require fewer nutrient additions and are also more resistant to diseases. Different chestnut species are often grown in a pennage system for fattening pigs. Running poultry beneath the trees before and after nut harvesting can provide pest control. Stands of chestnut trees in northwest Spain can provide feed for pigs when the fruit fall in November and provide an excellent habitat for the commercial production of edible mushrooms. In Spain, in the production of high-quality walnut trees using rotation of up to 50-60 years, there are options to establish a legume-based mixed pasture understory and to introduce sheep to provide financial and environmental benefits. Chestnut groves are also very popular in most continental areas of Greece, with grazing by sheep and goats and being the most common traditional use. Biodiverse Galician chestnut system belongs to Natura 2000 network. It is a priority area for birds and is part for recovery plan for the local bear population. Research in the Netherlands provided feasibility of intercropping of multipurpose timber tree, chestnut, walnut, and cherry with pasture. During the 4 years of tree cultivation, there was no negative influence on composition and production of the grass vegetation. The rotational grazing system using a chicory pasture established in a chestnut forest in northeastern Beijing, China, promoted better life performance, carcass yield, and meat and egg quality of Beijing ewe chickens compared with the free-range system herding on bare land, in addition of allowing saving 50% of supplemental feed. In terms of chestnut allelopathy, American chestnut leaves produce allelopathic chemicals that inhibit the germination of lettuce, rosebay, rhododendron, and eastern hemlock seeds. Allelopathy is a presumed mechanism to control by American chestnut the competition from both tree and shrub species in the pre-blight southern Appalachian forest, and chestnut elimination might be responsible for rapid expansion of Rosebery rhododendron during the 20th century. European chestnut and Douglas fir are compatible intercrop for mixed timber plantation as demonstrated in northern Portugal, where chestnut trees have bigger diameter and height, soil demonstrate higher fertility, and leaves higher nutrient content. However, fir and beech showed a better competitive potential in comparison with chestnut trees in northern Italy. These species outcompete and over-aged chestnut copies on suboptimal or marginal sites, and regular coppicing is needed to keep the chestnut component on the stand. In order to preserve tree composition and improve stand biodiversity, tree-oriented silviculture approach of forest management can be applied. It is based on early selection of tree crops whose growth will be favored, and applying frequent thinning on their neighborhood. In temperate climate of Appalachia, USA, the Chinese chestnut demonstrated the higher survival rate in the mixed stand with red oak, a desired mature forest species, pawpaw, hazelnut, and white pine. Chestnut and hazelnut were negatively impacted by forest age, more than oak or pawpaw. Authors conclude that shade-tolerant trees such as pawpaw should be planted on the southern row, and sun-loving species such as chestnut or hazelnut on the northern, as these two species demonstrated decreased growth that might be attributed to shading. Oak and chestnut required protection from deer. Oak density was positively correlated to the density of generalist native parasitoid of Asian chestnut, gallwasp, one of the most serious pests of chestnut. Being a keystone taxa across the western Palearctic, oaks support more associated insects than any other forest trees, and native parasitoids can switch between oak and chestnut pests. Chestnut has positive effect on soil organic matter content and microclimate. Study in Crete demonstrated that chestnut stands moderate the extreme temperatures, which are characteristic of Mediterranean summers, and create unique microclimatic and soil conditions for specific biomes. Iberian chestnut sautas also contribute to groundwater recharge and improve regulating ecosystem services, including reduction of nitrate and soil losses, higher carbon sequestration, higher functional biodiversity focused on pollination, and greater habitat diversity. A number of cover crops have been tested for weed control in hazelnut orchards. Mixture of ryegrass, hairy vetch, and red clover has reduced weed density, biomass, and diversity in northern Turkey, and hairy vetch has demonstrated the best weed suppression potential among several clover and fescue species tested in another experiment. Clover increased soil microbial biomass in the study performed in Italy. Brassica cover crops, in particular Oriental mustard, were in Netherlands. Hazelnut was intercropped with walnut and sea buckthorn. This polyculture was designed to combine walnut with earlier yielding crops to generate income before walnut starts to produce. With tree growth, sea buckthorn was heavily pruned to prevent competition with the walnut and hazelnuts, and later it was completely removed. Hazelnut is frequently intercropped with alder, ash, birch, and oak. Hazel leaf litter is rich in nitrogen and potassium to benefit nearby crops. Traditional European systems include interplanted system of hazels and vines. In Kentish orchards, gooseberries and currants were traditionally interplanted with young hazels. Sheep can be pastured in walnut orchard with an added benefit of controlling unwanted sucker growth. Running chickens below trees that eat overwintering pupae of hazelnut weevil aid in pest control. Badgerset Research Corporation in Minnesota designed a staple crop carbon sequestering system with neo-hybrid hazelnut and hickory pecans grown in double rows and coppiced to the ground on roughly 10 years rotation. This kind of coppicing is an alternative to pruning for rejuvenation and for removal of diseased or unproductive wood. The coppiced material is available as biomass feedstock. Sheep and horses graze the grass between rows, poultry are used for insect control, and hogs are introduced after harvesting to clean up fallen nuts and convert them to pork. Hazelnuts support many types of wildlife, including insects, birds, and mammals. Bees, particularly bumblebees, are attracted by the early pollen. 52% of Kentish farmers noticed wildlife benefit from cobnut plots, and hazel, as a native species, should have more species of wildlife associated with it than introduced species. Hedge grows with timber trees, walnut, ash, sycamore, and cherry, interplanted with hazel bushes, attract a larger number of natural enemies than the number of crop pests in northern England. Moreover, the number of arthropods found in this hedge were significantly higher compared to both the forest plot and woodlots. Next, nut tree species that we consider is Pistacia. Essential oil from two species of Pistacia can inhibit or reduce the growth of wheat species, with dicots wheats being significantly more sensitive than monocots. And saponin from Chinese pistache was a promising compound for controlling snail. Ginkgo is traditional agroforestry systems in subtropical China had better kernel quality indicators than pure ginkgo stand, and ginkgo kernel quality in ginkgo broad bean peanut system was the best, followed by ginkgo wheat peanut, ginkgo mulberry, ginkgo cole peanut, and ginkgo cole corn. Agroforestry systems shown on the slide had a higher structural diversity, increased leaf area, and enhanced total production, providing also soil erosion control and buffering of microclimate changes, and improved nutrient cycling compared to monoculture systems. In southeastern China, ginkgo wheat and ginkgo broad bean intercrops competed for nitrogen. Since annual crops were more competitive than ginkgo, the rate of ginkgo in mixture had to be increased up to 5:1 in order to have an over-yielding intercrop. Ginkgo wheat mixture had the maximum economic yield. Ginkgo broad bean mixture demonstrated the most beneficial effects, while ginkgo rapeseed mixture exhibited an antagonistic interaction and is not recommended for intercropping. Considering soil fertility maintenance, multi-annual soil organic carbon deposition, and fungal community survival and stability, the agroforestry system achieved better results, and ginkgo wheat system was the best among the studied intercropping systems. Ginkgo leaf extract has antifungal properties to brown rot of palm fruits. Verticillium wilt and root extracts act as antifidant and insecticides to the European corn borer, and as antiviral to the southern mosaic bean virus. Ginkgo also produced allelopathic compound, and leaf litter inhibited the growth of ryegrass, garden cress, lettuce, and timothy. An interesting agroforestry design approach, learning from nature and back to nature, was implemented to develop viable agroforestry scenario for yellowhorn. This is a Chinese endemic oil woody plant. 18 species combinations were designed based on a plant-positive association with yellowhorn in natural community and on anticipated economic benefits. These are medicinal plants, and two of them, which are marked with arrows, has an additional benefit of nitrogen fixation. Next tree crop which we consider is pecan. Self-seeding annual leguminous plants such as blackpot vetch, arrowleaf clover, crimson clover, or spotted medic are recommended as winter cover crops, in particular in pecan orchard with sprinkler irrigation. An appropriate selection allows to minimize excessive mowing and supply nitrogen in the most suitable time for trees. Application of nitrogen fertilizers and spring mowing before seed maturation lead to elimination of many desired cool season leguminous plants, while favoring perennial grasses such as Bahia grass, Bermuda grass, or centipede grass in the resident understory vegetation. Therefore, supplemental nitrogen fertilizer, if required, should be restricted to narrow, usually 3-meter wide bands beneath the trees, and not broadcasted onto alleys with legumes. Immature legumes, usually at the early bloom stage, are normally mowed or plowed when they have the best nitrogen to carbon ratio in their biomass. If mature legumes are terminated, this allows reseeding. However, their residues will have more lignin and less nitrogen, what slows down their decomposition. Most nitrogen will be relocated to seeds, and in case of small copious seeds, it will be soon converted to inorganic forms. However, in case of hard seeds, such as arrowleaf clover and some varieties of crimson clover, nitrogen-contained terrain could be tied up for several years. An alternative approach would be to use indeterminate legumes, which retain substantial nitrogen in roots and shoot after producing seeds. After maturation of approximately 20% of seeds, they can be disked, or better incorporated with rolling cultivators to minimize soil compaction. In cool temperate climate of Georgia, USA, an alternative 2-meter-wide strips of cool season cover crops could be tilled in mid to late April or allowed to mature. The tilled strips would supply nitrogen to pecan trees immediately, while the adjoining untilled reseeding strips could be mowed after seed is mature to ensure dispersal of seeds and re-establishing of cover crops over the entire alley. Rotary mowing of remnant strips could disperse seeds to tilled areas. Same strategy could be used with summer cover crops. Mowing of alternative strips may also ensure continuity of arthropod habitats through time. Some legumes discharge seeds to a distance of 2 meters or more, and they does not require mowing of seeding strips for seeds dispersal across alley. With such crops, reseeding strips might only be required in alternate years. Width and distribution of remnant strips should be based on seed production per unit area, the amount of seeds required to sow the cover cropped area, and the seed dispersal with various mowers. About 10% of the cover crops by area should be allowed to mature for adequate reseeding of the entire orchard understory. Cool season cover crops can be planted throughout pecan orchards. 3 rows could be devoted to early maturing winter cover which have mature seeds by the time pecan is in full leaf and compete little with the trees. Mixed winter annual cover crops, including later maturing, could be grown in the alleys. Note that late maturing cool season legumes can suppress the yield of associated perennial warm season grasses such as Bermuda grass. Many cool season legumes produce without tillage a good number of volunteer stands among warm season perennial cover crops. Warm season cover crops should be restricted to alleys to reduce possible competition for water with pecan, when they will also receive better illumination when trees are in leaf. Seeds of warm season legumes may be broadcasted or drilled, but most of them require disking for better establishment, except of snowy partridge pea and hairy indigo. Summer cover crops can include vining species which will run into a tree-row strip over the dead mulch provided by winter cover crops to limit weed growth. So forming warm season grasses should be combined with summer annual legumes to establish grass carpet after mowing cover crops for easy nut harvesting. Cover crops residues can be mowed from early into tree-row strips, for example, using side discharge mowers to provide weed-suppressive mulch and encourage decomposer organisms. Mulching can be also attained without mowing. For example, unmowed stand of mature hairy vetch with rye can suppress warm season weeds, including perennial grasses, for several weeks into summer. The perennial warm season grasses are mowed closely during autumn. Under these conditions, most of the cool season cover crops of interest can be seeded by no-till drill or broadcasted by broadcasting seeds and following superficial tillage. Since leguminous residues degrade more rapidly than grass residues, the warm season understory vegetation, which is rich in legumes, should be mown when at least some seed will mature to combine aims of reseeding with the preparation of clean orchard floor before nut harvesting. Several approaches may assist warm season legumes in competing C4 weeds, such as Bermuda grass and redwood pigweed. It is important to establish summer legumes soon after the last shred of frost and before hot, dry weather. Shallow cultivation could temporarily reduce perennial grasses before the legumes are sown. And also, because a drought might be expected to harm non-C4 plants' ability to compete, irrigation could be used when dry conditions prevail. Legumes with ability to withstand competition from C4 plants can be used or combined with grasses that are less competitive with desired legumes. If warm season perennial legumes are used, they should be mowed periodically for green leaf manure or mulch. With cover crops of high biomass, mowing also may be advisable prior to tillage. Some cover crops, such as soft chess, does not require additional irrigation and can improve water infiltration. Cool season cover crops can provide alternative prey, such as aphids and thrips, that are not themselves pests of pecan, and ensure reproduction and retention of lady beetles and other aphid predators in orchard until pecan aphids emerge in early May. At this time, winter cover crop usually senescens, and pest predators can disperse to pecan. An example is hairy vetch and crimson clover with rye. In this mixture, rye provides structural supports to vining hairy vetch, helping to establish dense ground cover, which is efficient in weed suppression. In addition, dense fibrous root mass of rye can scavenge nitrogen and thus decrease nitrogen losses and environmental contamination. If cover crops are grown to provide mulch for suppression the warm season weeds and for water conservation in spring and summer, some investment in autumn irrigation to help crop establishment might be feasible. However, sprinkler irrigation of legumes can promote fungal epizootics and reduce population of pea aphids, which in turn could lead to reduced densities of lady beetles in the legumes. Warm season legumes can also sustain aphidophagous insects. For example, Sesbania often harbors cowpea aphid and banded winged whitefly, and can sustain lady beetles when pecan aphids are scarce. Unfortunately, Sesbania has the disadvantage of harboring high densities of various stink bugs. Mowing or tillage of warm season cover crops may be needed to divert aphid predators from cover crops to pecan trees, and at the prospective time of pest outbreak on pecan. Several winter annual weeds that are common in pecan orchards can also harbor aphids and aphidophagous insects. Use of potent insectary cover crops could be restricted to relatively few alleys. Here is the summary of some annual leguminous cover crops that can be used in pecan orchards. Crops can perform complementary roles and should be combined to optimize resource partitioning, for example in terms of moisture, soil and shade optima of tolerances. An example is a multilayered composition of warm season legumes where relatively shade-tolerant hairy indigo and snowy partridge pea occupy the lowest level, overtopped by tall erect sesbania plants, which in turn support the vining Florida velvet beans and hyacinth beans. The first four plants are also drought-tolerant. As for other hickories, they ultimately need about 12–15 meter spacing between trees, which opens possibility of interplanting one or two fruit trees between pecan trees, which will have 15–25 years of growth and crop before the hickories will need the space. Hickories are late to leaf out in spring and relatively early to drop their leaves in mid-autumn. Thus, there is a good potential for growing an undercrop, particularly one that is cropped in late spring. Study in eastern China showed that grass cultivation under Chinese hickory stand can efficiently improve the soil organic carbon content, soil NPK content, and microbial functional diversity, decrease soil acidification and erosion. Allelopathic effect of walnut, with the black and Manchurian walnut being the most suppressive, had been continuously reported in the academic publications since 19th century, and allelopathic compound juglone was isolated and characterized in the second half of 19th century. Juglone may enter the soil preliminary through root exudation, but also via leaf and male catkins litter decay and through fall or being washed from the leaves. Volatiles from walnut leaves are also slightly inhibitory. Walnut chips, however, does not pose strong inhibitory effect. Juglone effect is exacerbated in drought conditions under competition between plants for water and on poorly drained soil. Suppressive effect is less pronounced when trees are grown on deep, fertile soil and under sufficient nitrogen application. Juglone concentration decreased by 80% at distance 4.25 meters from a row of 10-year-old black walnut trees. Yet results have often been contradictory, in particular between greenhouse and field trials, and depend on the age and cultivar of walnut tree and on soil characteristics. Nowadays, intercropping is mainly practiced in the young walnut orchard, as well as with the installation of root barrier, root trenching, or disking. Juglones inhibit not only plant growth, but also the nutrient uptake, as it was demonstrated, for example, for strawberry. Researchers observe narrowing of xylem vessel radius in stems, which might be a possible defense mechanism to limit juglone translocation, but would also negatively affect water and nutrient translocation and thus decreasing plant growth. Latter is also linked to the reduction of proton ATPase activity in root cells that limit solute uptake. Juglones also cause respiratory inhibition of mitochondria, reduction of plastoquinone synthesis and photosynthesis, and increase of lignin content in cell walls. At the same time, walnut has a number of traits beneficial for intercropping. In the spring, black walnut is one of the last species to leave out, and in the fall, one of the first to drop its leaves, reducing competition for sunlight with winter crops. It also produces a large taproot and has a deep rooting system, leaving the top 10 centimeters of soil horizon available for root growth of companion species. Yet, competition for water with summer crops is often reported. Juglans are not very mobile in soil. They are absorbed by organic matter and rapidly decomposed by bacteria. Soil under walnut trees usually have greater amount of organic matter due to a slower decomposition process, and decomposer guild is dominated by arthropods, while earthworms are scarce. Juglone has been shown to play a role in resistance towards fungal diseases. In North America, black walnut is most commonly intercropped with corn and soybeans, and often with winter wheat, barley, and milo. Yield reduction is often observed, 39% for corn and more for soybeans. Corn produces flavor reductase that potentially detoxifies juglone. As for the vegetables, pronounced growth reduction is observed for tomato, cucumber, and alfalfa, and less for potato and pepper. Walnut can affect the taste of beets, but not the yield. As for leaf vegetables, the order of sensitivity to black walnut intercropping increases as it's written on the slide. The most sensitive groups are also listed. Livestock is feasible to introduce after 15 years, when trees are large enough to withstand damage and does not need fencing. Heifer and hens benefit from partial shade under adolescent walnut stand. Forage crops such as red and white clover, orchard grass, and red fescue can also be planted in alleyways of young and adolescent walnut orchard to be harvested as a hay crop in silvopastoral system. It was demonstrated that oat, red clover, red fescue intercrop does not suppress the growth of black walnut seedlings, and that red fescue better produces in medium density stands 7.3 meters between rows versus low or high density stands. And in another publication, Kentucky bluegrass was reported as less competitive to walnut than tall fescue. Alfalfa is reported as not compatible with black walnuts. A pine walnut plantation with an annual ryegrass and cereal rye between the rows as a heifer pasture produced approximately 80% of the forage produced in control plot without trees, but beef heifer average daily weight gain was equal for both treatments. Black walnut may establish poorly on sites which lack tree cover and may grow better if interplanted with so-called nurse species, which protect the young walnut trees from mechanical damage and enhance the soil conditions. Walnut does not suppress endo and ectomycorrhiza development, presuming that plant fungal associate might be involved in juglone detoxification. As for timber tree species, red oak is not suppressed by black walnut, while many tree species, including a white and red pine, white birch, American elm, sugar maple, and ash, are suppressed by walnut. But this suppression occurs over time, and sensitive trees can be used as temporary intercrop and as nurse species. Autumn olive and black locust both improve black walnut growth, and autumn olive may reduce leaf spot and anthracnose because of associated microarthropods, which consumes the leaf litter carrying the disease. In addition, autumn olive is shorter than black walnut, and it prevents deer from damaging walnut trunk without overtopping and competing for sunlight with the walnut. Black locust, however, quickly grows tall and potentially compete with black walnut tree via shading. Black locust can be cropped for bolewood, and the resultant nitrogen release in the root zone could benefit adolescent walnut trees, whereas autumn olive would die off due to shade in the medium term and release nitrogen without providing a wood crop. Because significant level of juglone is released during tree and root damage, it is better to harvest interplanted walnut for timber later in the year, when juglone concentration is lower. Juglone can persist in soil for more than 1 year after tree removal, particularly if the stump has not been killed. In the next few slides, I have included compatibility tables of different plants with black walnut, and you can extrapolate this data to other walnut species. Please note that walnut can be intercropped also with incompatible species, while trees are young, presuming a sufficient distance between tree rows and no direct root contact. You can find the link to a slide under video description below to study these tables, or you can pause video when I will briefly display all the spreadsheets. Another article provides a report on valuable black walnut plants and animal companion crops which may be grown in the short term up to 15 years after planting walnut trees, medium terms from 15 to 30 years, and long term, more than 30 years after planting walnut, reflecting gradual juglone accumulation in soil. Companion crops can provide nitrogen fixation, added yield, aid in development of straight walnut stems for timber production, or provide a protection from deer. During the first years, walnut grow deep taproot, while shoot growth is slow. Thus, a full sun is available during the first 5-7 years, and fast-growing juglone-sensitive plants can be interplanted. For example, alder may be planted for timber, nitrogen fixation, and for helping walnut to develop straight trunk. Alder will be gradually thinned between 4 years and 19 years after stand establishment to pay for the cost of establishing the black walnut stand. Soybean and wheat could be cultivated between tree rows without yield decrease for the first 7 years, and corn for the first 10 years. Black walnut can produce both nuts and valuable timber, and it is often planted as a retirement crop. Species that produce economic value during the first 20 years after walnut stand establishment are needed to make the system more profitable. Onions, parsnip, Jerusalem artichoke, sugar beet, and certain species of bean are tolerant to juglones. Between 15 and 30 years of walnut establishment, shade and juglone-tolerant crops can be grown. Black raspberry, currants, elderberry, and wild grapes can be grown under walnut canopy, whereas blackberry outside of the crown area. Mulberry, pawpaw, and American persimmon are tolerant to black walnut. After 30 years, when walnut become shady and allelopathic, few ephemerals and late ripening fruits may be interplanted to utilize sunny period in walnut orchard in spring and fall. As well, American ginseng, shiitake, and oyster mushrooms, which benefit from shady and moist conditions in summer. In video description below, you will find the link to slides as well as references and highlights to publications cited in this video lecture. As for pecan and walnut, I have presented only data from review articles, but there is a number of publications with useful information for designing polyculture for these nut crops. Finally, I invite growers of tree nut and fruit crops, all growers with experience in crop diversifications, researchers and agriculture extension specialists to participate in one of the surveys listed on these slides. The links are also provided in description to this video below. With your help, we will be able to develop free software to help farmers to design crop polycultures. We also invite you to subscribe to our Facebook page Polycultures and Permaculture, where we share useful information on crop polycultures from the academic polyculture and directly from growers. And we invite you to share your practical experience on this page. On our website, you will find recorded conference presentations, proceedings, and resolution of the Research and Practice Conference Polycultures and Permaculture, which was organized in January-February 2020. Thank you very much for your attention.